All right. This should be AP Psych, excuse me, Unit 7 lecture. I'm sorry, Unit 7 lecture 7, if I'm not mistaken. This is the second lecture that goes with intelligence. I'm kind of doing them out of order, so I'm losing track there. This should be assessing intelligence. So you should have looked at intro to intelligence. This is assessing intelligence. So we're still on vocab number 14. So let's take it on through, shall we? So we talked about intelligent tests before, or I'm sorry, we talked about intelligence. What is intelligence? There's different types of intelligence and everything else. This lesson is going to talk about how do you measure that? How do you measure intelligence? So we're going to take a look at intelligent tests, which is just a method of assessing your aptitude, your ability to do things, but also to take a look at what you've learned as well, and then compare yourself to others and see sort of where you fall amongst the population. This began with Alfred Binet, French psychologist from 1857 to 1911, very popular during the Industrial Revolution, because you had more kids moving from the country to the city who had never had any formal education. So at this point, you just had teachers going, okay, you seem dull. You seem not dull as in boring, but dull as in not bright. You seem more intelligent. We'll put you in the third grade. We'll put you in the first grade, whatever, regardless of their age. Well, that's a lot leaving on a teacher. So there had to be some sort of standard to be set. What does every first grader know? What does every fifth grader know? What does every ninth grader supposed to know? So you could remove teacher bias from that. And he also assumed all children follow the same course of intellectual development, going through Piaget, even though Piaget is after this, but there were certain milestones that everybody will basically learn. So what had to be determined was the mental age. What is a correct mental age? A physical age, that's just how old you are. When's your birthday? How old are you? Cut you in half, count the circles, whatever. But mental age is taking a look at, do you know what somebody your age should in fact know? Is there a standard of what you know? A child who does as well as the average 8-year-old is said to have a mental age of 8. You know what an 8-year-old is supposed to know. If you're a little bit behind, if I'm a 10-year-old, but I only know what an 8-year-old is know, I'm a little bit slower. But if I'm a 10-year-old and I know everything a 12-year-old is supposed to know, I'm a little bit advanced. So there had to be some reasoning, problem-solving questions, all of these things that could predict school achievement. What is your ability down the road, an aptitude test? And again, he's only looking to measure and predict achievement, not explaining why you are what you are, how you got there, and everything else, but just simply, this is who you are going forward. Didn't explain how you got there. He personally believed it was environmental, and that if kids were sort of labeled, then maybe that would be a moment where they could catch up to their peers by doing something like this. This Binet intelligent test was later on adopted in the United States and became known as the Stanford Binet intelligent test. So you've got to take it to California, and you sort of need to Americanize it a little bit. Found that the Paris norms did not work well with California school children. Our education system wasn't matched up with theirs. Expanded the test to also include teenagers as well as adults, still based on a mental age, but when you do it with adults, it becomes a little bit difficult. Teenagers, a little bit harder. Elementary school, very, very simple to do. And I'll explain that in a little bit. By the way, if you're curious which answer goes there, it's number 5. So you come up with what is called an intelligent quotient. An intelligent quotient, which is your IQ, you just take your mental age and you divide it by your chronological age. So again, if you're an 8-year-old, and you know what an 8-year-old should know, it's 8 over 8 times 100. 8 over 8, which is 1, times 100 is 100. So you have 100 IQ. If you are an 8-year-old, but you answer on a 10-year-old level, then we got 10 over 8, which is 1.25 times 100 is 125. If I am an 8-year-old, my chronological age, but I only know what a 6-year-old is supposed to know, that's 6 over 8. 0.75 times 100, you got a 75 IQ. Again, this doesn't translate well for adults because what is a 45-year-old supposed to know as opposed to what a 32-year-old is supposed to know? There's not these sort of standards that are set. There's not these moments of achievement that are set in organized schools. So it becomes a little bit difficult, but suffice it to say that your IQ score at the age of 7 should be pretty consistent with what your IQ score is at 17, 27, 37. Because if you're a little bit advanced, odds are you're going to stay advanced. You're a little bit behind, odds are you're going to kind of stay behind. This sort of a program could be used very well in situations like World War One. They decided, who would be better in administration, who would be better, on the battlefield taking orders and all those other things. That could be good, but also was encouraged racist conclusions where you didn't sort of take the environment into account, which we'll talk about at the end. Could lead to the idea of eugenics. You're not smart, you should be castrated so you don't have kids. We shouldn't let certain people into the country who aren't smart, blah, 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 blah. But, I got someone from Italy taking a test in English. It doesn't necessarily mean whether they're smart or not, or even if that could be a qualification. There are some things here about IQ scores of historic figures along those lines as well. So let's talk about the different types of tests real quick. An aptitude test. An aptitude test is a test designed to predict your future performance. Think of aptitude, what I'm about to do is the way I sort of try to remember it. When you take your SAT, you take your ACT to get into college, that is a test that's supposed to measure what is the likelihood that I'm going to be successful in college. Or if you take the GRE, which is a graduate school entrance exam, what is the likelihood you're going to be successful in graduate school? Or GT tests that you took in elementary school. What is the likelihood that I would perform well in Horizons classes? On the other side of the equation is what is called the achievement test. And an achievement test is a test that's designed to see what have you gained, what have you gathered. When I give you a unit test in psychology, that is an achievement test. What is everything you've learned about personality and intelligence up until this point? A final exam. What have you achieved in new knowledge in the last semester? Unit tests, anything like that is an achievement test. Now, where this gets tricky is there's sort of a fuzzy merger between these two. In order for me to take the SAT, I've got to be able to read. I got to have reading comprehension. I got to be able to do analogies. I've got to be able to do math and all these other things. So there is a little bit of achievement that's involved in that. So even though it's an aptitude test, it's supposed to predict what I can do down the road. It's also measuring what I've achieved in my education. And also my ability to learn, my aptitude, my ability to learn is going to help me in an achievement test as well. My natural ability to be successful, to be studied, whatever, that's going to help me. So it's kind of a fuzzy line between the two. Now, when it comes to an IQ test, the most common IQ test used today is what's called the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, the WAIS, created by David Wechsler. Originally, there's also one for children as well, the WISC. Consists of 11 subtests, and then what it does is it gives you an overall score. It gives you a verbal score and a performance score, which is nonverbal. Difference between any scores here could show a learning problem. For example, if you come over here and your letter numbering sequence is significantly different from your comprehension sequence, it could show a bit of a learning disability and can kind of show that. Shows areas of strengths as well as areas of weaknesses. But if you take a look at the general intelligence that we talked about earlier, all these scores should really sort of come out the same, theoretically. Theoretically. There's a great difference. Then you're talking about someone that might have a learning disability in one particular area that can be identified. Now, what you'll see is this is the breakdown of what the test is looking to measure. Your full scale IQ is a combination of your verbal IQ and your performance IQ. And your verbal IQ is verbal comprehension, working memory, combine those. And your performance IQ is your perceptual organization and your processing speed. Now, we're going to talk in a little bit about the Flynn effect and the fact that IQ scores have gotten higher, which is true. Your IQs are higher than people from 1920. But the major reason it's higher is your processing speed is much faster because you multitask more, you do things more, you're on your little smartphone more, you're constantly doing things, playing games, whatever, that people weren't doing in the 1920s. Now, on the other side of the equation, what's suffering a little bit is your working memory. Because why do I need to remember something? keep it in my mind when I can just keep it in my phone? Why do I need to know the definition of this or the capital of this when I can just look it up in my phone? So as much as you guys are doing better here, you're doing worse here, but this is outperforming, the improvement here is outperforming the struggle over there. So let's take a look at each one. First off, verbal comprehension measures things like vocabulary. Tell me the word corrupt. Similarities, how is this like that, and how are they different? How is wool the same as cotton? They kind of feel the same, can make similar clothing, but there's two different sources, one's from sheep and one's grown. Information, what day of the year is Independence Day, and also comprehension. Why do people buy fire insurance? And what's very important here, you notice that a lot of these don't have a single answer. That's why if you take an IQ test online where you're answering a few questions and it goes, you have 148 IQ, please realize that that's not a real IQ test. It's a website that wants you to link and wants you to like and wants traffic. They're not going to tell you you're an idiot. A true IQ test takes about 6 to 8 hours, and it's done by an individual. And there's some answers for corrupt that are good, and there's some that are better, and there's some that are amazing. Same thing with fire insurance. There's good answers, there's better answers, there's amazing answers. Very similar to how I have to grade your essays. Then the second part of the verbal IQ is what is called working memory, where you have to do all these things in your head. If eggs cost 60 cents a dozen, what does one egg cost? Can you do that in your head? Most of us can't. If I told you the numbers 3, 4, 1, 8, 6, 2, could you repeat them back to me? Or if I told you the numbers 8, 4, 3, 7, 5, 9, could you repeat those numbers to me backwards without writing it down? That's what you guys are suffering a little bit with. Letter and number sequencing. If I gave you the word naturalization, I said using the letters from the word naturalization, can you come up with the word nominal? Don't write it down, but can you pull that out in your working memory there where you can only keep 7 to 9 items? That's what's measured in the verbal IQ. That's where you guys are suffering a little bit. Where you guys are having massive improvement from generations before you are things like this, puzzles. Picture completion, which of these pictures completes this? Block design, which pieces down here would I need to complete that? Matrix reasoning, of this, what's going to fill in the blank there? This is where your phone helps you out because you're playing games all the time, using that part of your brain and everything else to do that. Also, what's done is what's called a performance IQ, where you're given relatively easy tasks, but it wants to see how fast can you do this? Because again, like I've said before, you got the kid, what is 12 plus 4? It's 8, versus the kid, what is 12 plus 4? They go, okay, well, actually, I'm sorry, 12 minus 4 is 8, 12 plus 4 is 16. What is 12 plus 4? They go, okay, I got 12, 13, 4. Okay, he's going to get the right answer. But the fact that it takes him longer shows not as much intelligence as someone who can do that faster. What's very important with tests like this is you need what is called standardization. Make sure that nobody has an advantage or anything like that. Normally, when taking the AP exam, the ACT, the SAT, everybody takes it in the same setting, give it at the same time. Desks are arranged similar. There's a clock available. There's a calculator. Everybody kind of has the same setup, the same instructions, are verbally read by the proctor in the same way, making sure that nobody has an advantage over anybody else. You want to make sure that the tests are standardized. And then you're looking for a curve. This is a curve where most people are going to fall in the middle. When you ask your teacher, would you curve the test? You don't want them to curve the test. You want them to give bonus points. Because to curve the test, if I had a test and everybody got a 95 on it, but I wanted the average to be an 85, I'd have to take points away because that's where I want my average to be. You guys want bonus points. A curve basically means that I want most people to come in the middle. I want most 10-year-olds to know what a 10-year-old is supposed to know. So most people should fall within this little range right here, and that's 68% of the population of people are going to score within a standard deviation of one side or the other. And in this particular thing, for an IQ test, the standard deviation is 15 points. 68% of the people, again, will fall within one standard deviation, half of them that way and half of them that way. And this is going to be a normal curve. If you've got a 90 IQ, if you've got a 110 IQ, that falls into normal. You're within a reasonable range. Most people are kind of where they're supposed to be. Now, the second standard deviation over, we go 15 more points this way, 15 more points this way. That's where we're starting to talk about a little bit slow or a little bit advanced, okay? And that's going to be 14% of the population here, 14% of the population there. So 96% of the population will fall within 2 standard deviations of the mean, which is 100 right here. A 10-year-old is supposed to know what a 10-year-old is supposed to know. But only 2% of the population will go below 70 or will go above 130. Some graphics of this, you'll see it's 1% of the population. But this one has it set at 2. And only 0.1% of the population is going to be extremely slow or extremely intelligent. So again, when you're taking that IQ test online with a calculator, cheating however you are, and it comes back, you've got 148 IQ, you probably don't. Again, they're just looking, it's not a scientific test in any way. And again, some things there if you want to take a look at IQ testing. Standard deviation, which we talked about in unit 3, I want to say. This is the measure of how spread out it is. A small standard deviation, you'll see a very little variation in the scores. A larger standard deviation is a greater variation in the scores. And again, when we're taking a look at an IQ test, a standard deviation is 15 points. Most people will fall within 1 standard deviation. And that's sort of what you need to know. If you're in statistics, you can figure out how to figure out the standard deviation. That's great. But what you need to know about standard deviation is that in a standard curve, 2/3 of the population will fall within 1 to the left or to the right. 96% of the population will fall within 2. 2 to the left, 2 to the right. That's kind of what you need to get out of this. The Flynn effect, as we talked about before, people are becoming smarter than what they've ever been before. And this is largely due to processing speed. If you take a look at somebody's IQ in 1920 compared to today, there's a difference. We take, let's say, a standard here of the person in 1920 today with 100 IQ today would be the equivalent of or somebody with 100 IQ, I'm sorry, back in 1920 would be the equivalent of a 75 today. Because again, the processing speed isn't as quick and everything else. Where a lot of people will make an argument, they'll go, well, yeah, what about a test like the SAT? I mean, the score, everyone complains that the scores are going down. Part of the reason the scores are going down is you're taking a bigger population of people. You know, everybody's taking the SAT, as opposed to when I was in high school, it was only people who were going off to college. Well, if I have everybody taking the SAT and not everybody's going to go to college and not everybody cares about the SAT, so they fill out their name and fall asleep, it's going to bring the average down. So we got to keep that into effect. Wider range of students going to college, again, with the aptitude test. Again, IQ scores are going to stay pretty consistent over your lifetime. That I took an IQ test when I was in the 5th grade, 4th grade, 6th grade, in that ballpark. I'm pretty sure that my IQ today would be pretty similar to that. And I'm not telling you what that score was. We may get smarter over the years. We may become better test takers over the year. But for the most part, you'll see somebody who scored an 80 at 11 and was tested again at the age of 80. It's a pretty positive correlation that goes up. There could be a couple of points up or a couple of points down, but it stays pretty consistent. Now, again, to study these changes, there's 2 ways we can do this, and we've talked about this before. A cross-sectional study is for me to study people over a long, to take a bunch of people at this moment and test them all. Let me compare an 80-year-old's IQ versus a 18-year-old's IQ. Well, the problem doing that is the 18-year-old and the 80-year-old don't have the same experience. And when the 80-year-old was 18, the world wasn't the same at that time. So what you have to do is you got to factor in these generational changes. Cross-sectional study is great because it's less expensive, large sample, give you the information right away, but it's an apples to oranges study. A longitudinal study is I look at the same person, I test them at 5, I test them at 15, I test them at 25, I test them at 55. And so I'm comparing apples to apples, but the problem with that takes 50 years. So again, there's a cross-sectional study versus a longitudinal study. We talked before about crystallized and fluid intelligence. When it's a cross-sectional study, there seems to be a dramatic difference in fluid intelligence, but when you look at the same person over an amount of time, the fluid intelligence difference really isn't that great. What else we got here? Okay, when it comes to test construction, 2 factors, reliability and validity. Reliability is how reliable is the test. Do you do the same on the odd that you do on the even? Did my second period class perform as well as my eighth period? I don't have an eighth period, seventh period class, which I don't have one of those either. But this is just, are the scores consistent, even if you give an alternate forms of the test? When last year, for example, in 2019, when my AP students, and I was the only school in the district that had two different versions of the AP exam. And so did my students perform as well on version A as my students performed on version B? That's what you're looking for, reliability. And the WAIS and WISC have a 0.9, which is very reliable. 1.0 is perfect reliability. 0.9 is pretty good. Validity is where is the test measuring what it's supposed to measure? Okay, does it meet the criteria for what I'm looking for? If I take a measuring tape and the measuring tape is inaccurate, it says 13 inches equal a foot, it's going to be pretty reliable because it's going to measure it wrong every time the same way. But is that a valid test? If I'm trying to test somebody, you want to get a driver's license, and I say, go home and make me a dozen chocolate chip cookies, and you come back and you make me a dozen chocolate chip cookies, and I say, go back and make me another dozen, you come back and they're going to taste exactly the same. That's reliable, but it's not valid. It has nothing to do with your driving ability. So you want to make sure that the test is measuring what it's supposed to measure. All right, content validity. If I'm giving you a psychology test and I suddenly ask you about the Pythagorean theorem, the ability of you to answer that at 8 a.m. versus 2 p.m. probably pretty consistent. So it's reliable, but it's not valid because it's not about what we've studied in psychology. Predictive validity. Again, this is the idea of, does a test measure what it's supposed to measure? When you take the SAT, does it truly measure your ability to do well in college? Predictive power of aptitude tests are very strong in early grades, but later on they sort of weaken. So when you took a test in the grade school, should you be in honors? It has a 0.6 predictor. And again, 0 would be no correlation. So 0.6 is pretty good. The SAT is 0.5 because now you're talking about college students or people wanting to go to college. And then the GRE is a 0.3 because now you're talking about a bunch of people who've already graduated from college. So as you get the population smaller and smaller and smaller, the predictive validity becomes less and less and less. The idea that I could take a bunch of kids in elementary school and the big kid's going to be a great offensive lineman because we're comparing him to everybody else. But does that necessarily mean if once he gets older, you might have been the great all-star athlete center fielder on your t-ball team, but it doesn't necessarily mean as the athletes become better and better and better, you're going to be an all-star when you're in high school or you're in college. Gender similarities and differences, getting ready to wrap it up here. Here's the general thing. Women and men have very similar average IQs. Average IQ for a woman's 100, average IQ for a man's 100. Boys tend to be better at spatial problems, knowing directions, complex math, although girls do score the same in computation, but guys in sort of how it applies. Girls tend to be better spellers, more verbally fluent because they use more words, all these other things. What's also interesting is that boys have a greater variety of scores. The very, very low scores are more likely to be boys, but also the very, very high scores are more likely to be boys. The scores in the middle are more likely to be women. So again, the danger with this is if we go, oh, boys are better at math, so they should become engineers, and it discourages women, that's where we have a problem. Or a guy shouldn't be an English teacher or whatever else the case. No, then we're going to have a problem. So we got to watch out for the self-fulfilling prophecy there. What we also have to watch it out is when we're talking about race, because most nations show differences amongst racial groups, but this isn't really about what's in here. It's about what's around you, because most of the differences that are found in race are socioeconomic more than they are racial, and what's inside of us. So it's much more of the nurturing impact more than the nature impact is. There's nearly no difference in IQ scores amongst college students of different races. If I take whites, blacks, and Hispanics, their IQ scores are going to be primarily the same. If I take high school or junior high, whites are going to tend to be higher because their socioeconomic conditions are going to tend to be better. But when I take all the people who qualified for college, whites, blacks, Hispanics, there's nearly no difference because, again, we're sort of eliminating the socioeconomic factor there. So many tests also don't take into account biased questions, examples being used, as well as the language being used and everything else there. Something else about IQ scores as a predictor. The higher you have of an IQ, the more likely you're going to live a longer life. Women with higher IQ scores versus lower IQ scores, a higher IQ person is going to eat better. They're going to do less risky behavior. Again, you see it here overall with people. You know, the higher IQ person is not going to take the risk. The lower IQ person is going to be the guy on Jackass who's going to strap fireworks, you know, to his crotch and blow him up. That guy's not going to live as long, nor is he going to reproduce, hopefully. No, that's eugenics. But also the idea of being successful. Does an IQ predict income? Well, a little bit, but you'll see here people that are extraordinarily wealthy. You've got some with the higher IQ scores, but you also have people with the lower IQ scores as well. There tends to be a real big mashup right here when we're talking about lower IQ right there, but there's also people that are performing low in this area as well. So again, it could be used as a predictor, but it's not necessarily a causation. There's your review, there's your review, there's a review, and other stuff as well that you can pause on. That's it. So that should wrap up all of intelligence and should wrap up vocab number 14 for you. I'm gonna